What's up, Star Wars nerds, and welcome to another episode of Brett on Fett. On today's episode, we're going to be talking Black Series with an in-hand review of the all-new NED-B figure. Plus, we'll be taking a look at the Prototype Boba Fett that I finally added to my collection, and then I'm going to be giving my thoughts on where I'm going from here with collecting Black Series. Let's get to it. Welcome back to the channel. This is episode 42 of Brett on Fett. And before we get started, I do want to just apologize for my voice. I am fighting a bit of a cold, but I wanted to get this video out, so I'm going to fight through it, so just bear with me on that. Now, last week, I picked up my very first Black Series figure with Hasbro's plastic-free packaging, and that is the NED-B. And so I definitely wanted to take some time to go over that figure with you guys and give you my thoughts on that. But before we get to that, I quickly want to show you the Black Series Prototype Boba Fett, which randomly showed up at my door yesterday from Amazon. I ordered this guy ages ago. I don't even remember when. I'd be honest with you, I'd kind of forgotten about it. But it did show up, and Boba Fett is obviously one of my focus characters, so I am happy to add this version of him to my collection. So let's take a look. Alright, so here's my new Boba Fett Prototype Armor for the Black Series. By no means is this a new figure, but it just took this long for the initial restocks to come through, apparently. Now, of course, this is a reissue from the Prototype Armor Boba Fett that was released in the Phase 2 or Blue Line Black Series. And taking a look at the box, it's got that great artwork on there, and man, I love the look of that Empire Strikes Back blue with that art. Man, it really makes me wish they had done a all-new Empire Strikes Back Boba Fett in that Galaxy-style packaging. But looking at the figure, I think he looks really cool in white. You can see the cape, they put that little dark gray stripe to give it some contrast, which is, like a nice touch. And he looks pretty cool, but I've noticed he's a little bit off-white, and I've grabbed this photo from the TVC version. You can see the photo of the original Prototype Armor costume, and you can see there is a huge difference in that shade of white. This is definitely a bone or just off-white that they've gone with. And also, I noticed he's got the dent in the helmet. That's not surprising because they're just using the same mold. I just wish they had gone ahead and made a cleaner helmet because the Prototype Armor was not supposed to be dinged up and all that. But they did get that white correct in the TVC version. And ironically, that was repacked in that short-lived Black Series 3.75 scale. So now that I finally have this Prototype Armor Boba Fett for the Black Series, I thought it'd be fun to bring in the other Black Series versions of Boba Fett. Starting with the original, this is the Empire Strikes Back Boba Fett. We've seen many iterations of this guy, starting with that awesome San Diego Comic-Con 2013 set. This is one of the favorites of my collection. Then we had him in the original Phase 1 regular Orange Line Black Series, followed by a re-release in the Archive collection, and around the same time, a re-release on the Empire Strikes Back 40th Anniversary card back. Next, let's bring in that more recent animated droid series Boba Fett. I love the paint job on this guy, of course. This is just another repaint of the same mold, and it came in that awesome droids box. Very cool stuff, love this figure. Next, I'm going to bring in the most recent version of this Boba Fett is the War of the Bounty Hunters Boba Fett in Disguise. This is where they basically took that mold and just painted him all in black. A lot of people weren't feeling this one, but I think he looks pretty cool, and I love the accessories with the battle axe. So I think it's a pretty awesome version of this Fett. Next, let's bring in another repaint of this same exact mold, and that is the carbonized version of Boba Fett. This is another figure that gets quite a bit of hate. A lot of people think this was a silly cash grab release, but I love the packaging and I love the metallic paint on him. I think he looks pretty cool. And here's another one of my favorite pieces in my collection. I've shown this one a ton of times on my channel. It's that SDCC 2019 Boba Fett with the vintage Kenner colors on a foil card back. Man, what an awesome figure. Again, same exact mold. All these figures you see at this point are the same exact figure, same mold, just different versions of paint. And as much as I love something about each and every one of these versions of this figure, I think most of us in the hobby will agree it is long overdue to finally retire this mold of Boba Fett. It dates back all the way to 2013. It's almost 10 years old. So definitely time to retire this guy. The articulation is way too stiff and limited. It looked good for the time, for 2013. It served its purpose. So now let's move on to bigger and better things for Boba Fett. And speaking of bigger and better things, let's bring in a couple of the newer molds of Boba Fett, starting with the Return of the Jedi Deluxe Boba Fett. Awesome figure, and in case you didn't know, pre-orders are still up for the carded version of him on the new 40th anniversary Return of the Jedi card back. Very cool card back. And finally, let's bring in the Boba Fett re-armored version from the Mandalorian series. Really cool figure. Love that look on him. And by the way, he has an awesome head sculpt on that figure. And that rounds out the different versions of the Boba Fett figures that I have in my collection. Now you may have noticed that I am missing the Boba Fett Tython version where he's not armored. And that's because I just never ordered this one. I just wasn't as interested in it. To me, Boba Fett is not Boba Fett without his armor. So this one is way low on my priority list. I will probably only pick him up if I find him on a really good discounted deal. And then there's the Boba Fett Tython Jedi Ruins figure for Black Series. Again, I didn't order this one. And as far as I know, it hasn't come out yet. I believe it's supposed to start shipping in the US in January 2023. And it is a Walmart exclusive. I just wasn't real excited about this one, but I'm sure I will eventually add it to my collection, probably pick it up if I see it in person. Alright, moving on to my review for the new Black Series NED-B. Here he is in that plastic-free packaging. This, of course, is not the first NED-B action figure we've gotten. We previously got the 3.75-inch scale retro collection version of NED-B, which is a very cheap looking, it's supposed to emulate what Kenner would have done in the 80s for the figure, so not a great version of the figure, but a very cool card back. And then we got another NED-B in this Obi-Wan-Kenobi 4-pack from Disney's Droid Factory line. A pretty good looking figure, not as great looking or as articulated had he been made by Hasbro as part of the vintage collection, but still passable for now. But back to our Black Series NED-B, I was firmly against the plastic-free packaging effort, but now that I have this in hand, I gotta admit, this package looks great. The photo is fantastic. It's really high quality. Of course, you got the cool artwork that they've always had on these Galaxy-style packages, but I was just really impressed with the photo image on the front, and they've kind of repeated it on the back. Now, I probably would have preferred the artwork repeated on the back like they've been doing, but that's not too big of a deal. And then something new, because you don't have that window, they've put another clear representation of the figure and everything that's included, along with some dimensioning, and then there's a label about the plastic-free packaging. So overall, this box looks fantastic, and since I'm an opener for the standard Black Series boxes, it's really not a big deal to me in this case. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I prefer this to the old style with the plastic windows. I would prefer to keep it that way because of the quality control concerns where you can't check issues with the figure before you purchase it in a store, for example. And I do feel bad for those in-box collectors who just want to buy it and display it on their shelf where you can see the figure. Believe me, I understand. I was there. I was that collector. So I do feel bad for those people, but if they're gonna get rid of some plastic, I think this was the way to go with the standard Black Series line, and I think they did an excellent job with the box design. Now, I don't normally film opening stuff out of the box, but since this is the first plastic-free one, I did want to do this on camera. So let's pop this guy open. I like to use a putty knife, by the way, to open my Black Series. Here's a little legal mumbo-jumbo paperwork. Let's slide the tray out and kind of not surprised how he's wrapped in paper, and then he's got these cardboard straps, which I think the only way to remove them is just basically tear them open. Let's get this guy torn open and take the figure out. He's got some nice tissue paper here. Let's pull the figure out. There he is. We'll look at him closer in a bit. Let's set him aside. I see on this tissue paper it's actually got the Star Wars Black Series emblem on it. So yeah, that's a pretty nice little touch there. A little nice detail to throw in. Now let's bring out the accessories. Okay, so these are in like a little compartmentalized pouch. So that's kind of cool. And here is his gun, his blaster. And there is his hammer, very cool. And there is his backpack. So there is everything out of the box. And here is the figure. I've already stuck his hammer accessory in his hand. I just thought that was a really awesome accessory, so couldn't wait to stick that in his hand. And looking at the figure, he looks very striking. I like the paint job on here overall. Really cool looking droid as a first impression, but I'm mostly drawn to his head. That's probably my favorite part so far, is the head sculpt, and it's double jointed. You know, it's got that ball joint for the head part and then another ball joint at the base of the neck. It's a little bit tight, but not too bad. I think it's fine for this type of droid. And looking at his midsection is probably the first downside I've noticed. It's rather a dull mold. You know, it's not painted, and it's just not very detailed. When you compare it to another deluxe figure such as the Dark Trooper, you look at his innards at that midsection, it's so much more detailed and intricate. And even the Republic security droid, which is not a deluxe figure by the way, has a much better looking and intricate innards at his midsection than NED-B does. So even if they had just thrown in some metallic paint to touch it up, I think it would have made this midsection look so much better. But overall, articulation seems adequate for this type of droid. You got enough little movement there in the thighs, and then you've got these pin joints which they use like on the Dark Trooper, which are pretty cool. Plenty of rotation at the knees, and the range of motion at the ankles is just fine for this type of droid. And looking at the arms a little closer, you can rotate the forearms, of course, at the joint. You got those pin joints, and I really like the hand. I love the hand sculpt. There is one issue, sort of, I'll talk about in just a second with that. But plenty of range of motion to get in different poses. I'm going to have to play with him off camera to get him in some really cool poses. Now looking at the back, of course I had to plug that backpack in, and these tubes that are molded into his back, you have to plug those in, and it's a little bit hard to get those guys in there. Especially the left one for me, I just cannot get it flush. I'm just really struggling. It's a little bit difficult. I'm sure it'll get in there. Yeah, it's basically in there, but just a little bit tricky. And the backpack, like I said, you know, it comes off and on, and you've got that standard kind of slot that it plugs into. And these are just never as snug as you want them to be, but it seems to be good enough and holding on there pretty well. Next, I'm going to put his blaster in his hand, and this is an issue because the blaster is entirely too small for his very large hands. And that's not Hasbro's fault, because this is screen accurate, because in the show, he's just picking up a blaster from one of the stormtroopers or one of the soldiers. You know, this is a blaster made for a regular sized human hand. And so you basically end up having to hold it with just his pointer finger and like his thumb. And so it's a little bit cumbersome, and I'm not sure how stable it is, but it does seem to be holding so far. One thing I did forget to mention with the articulation is he does have those nice hinge joints at the base of his arm, and that does come in handy with the posing. Next, I wanted to bring in a couple of other large droids, new droids from this year as well. All three of these guys are new molds, and just compare them to, you know, you got the Republic security droid, a very tall droid, but NED-B is still taller than him. So just wanted to show you guys the two next to each other. And then look at the Dark Trooper. This actually surprised me. For some reason I thought the Dark Trooper would be about the same height, but he's actually taller than the Dark Trooper as well. But like I said, all three of these are totally brand new molds for 2022. They look great. I love droids, and I hope Hasbro continues to give us new molds for droids for both Black Series and of course the Vintage Collection. Overall, I am very happy with this figure. I love droids, and this is such a cool one. It's an all-new sculpt. He has plenty of articulation you need, and overall the paint job is great. Again, I would have preferred some more metallic details in that midsection, but other than that, it's a good looking droid. The head sculpt is fantastic, the hammer is very cool, so overall, very happy to have this guy in my collection. Alright, now I've grabbed a handful of my Black Series figures because I want to discuss how I collect Black Series, how I've been collecting them, and how I plan on collecting moving forward. Now this is not at all to influence you guys on how I think you should be collecting Black Series, it's simply to give you some insight as to how I choose the figures I choose and what I tend to collect. Now first off, I do have what I consider a modest collection of Black Series figures. I have somewhere around 75 to 80 figures, the majority of which I have still mint on card or in box, but this past year I did start opening figures. I have quite a few opened. Most of these, if not all, are from the standard packaging. That's what I tend to open. I know you see some here in standard packaging unopened. I probably will open them eventually. One or two of them, I know, like Saw Gerrera, for instance, I did actually take out of the box and just put them back in. So, but yeah, the standard packaging ones I tend to open, but the ones mint on card or in the special packaging we'll show examples of in just a second, I tend to leave those mint in box. Now, the way that I've been collecting Black Series to this point is basically I just buy what I really like. Either characters I really like, or if just some particular figure just looks really cool to me, I'll pick it up. I'm also a huge sucker for the special packaging stuff, so the things that come on foil cards, like that awesome vintage Kenner color Boba Fett, or the retro style packages like the Clone Wars ones. You know, that kind of thing really appealed to me, so I'm always going to pick those style packages up. I also tend to look for figures we don't have in the vintage collection, so if it's a figure that's not in TVC and it's cool looking, I'm most likely picking it up. And when it comes to Black Series, I'm also very partial to droid figures and troopers. I just don't have a whole lot of regular human characters, and I don't even have very many Jedi or Sith figures, if I'm being honest. And I think part of the reason for that is because until recently, the face sculpts on these figures were a bit dodgy, both for Black Series and TVC, but the problem with Black Series is that it's just amplified because the figure is so much larger. But I think mostly the reason I collect troopers and droids is just a personal preference. They just tend to be the cooler looking figures to me. Next, I wanted to quickly discuss the standard 40th anniversary card backs for Black Series, and as much as I love traditional card back figures, I don't have very many of these for Black Series simply because they just take up too much space. I need my space for my TVC. So I'm showing 4 of my carded figures from Black Series, and I just wanted to give a little insight on how I chose these, for example. So first up with the C-3PO, this is a card back we don't have in TVC. We desperately need a 3PO on our regular Star Wars card back. We don't have it, so that appealed to me to get it for the Black Series. Then with the R2-D2, man, it's just such a classic card back. And with the TVC version, we got this, but it came with a dirtied R2. And so I always wanted a clean R2, so I really loved the Black Series version because they kept that clean R2 with that clean R2 card back. And then with the R5-D4, this is simply just my favorite card back, probably of all time. And so I just had to have that for that particular reason. And then with the Dagobah R2, it's one we completely don't have in the vintage collection. We don't have that card back, we don't have that particular R2, so that appealed to me as well. Alright, so that should give you a really good idea on how I choose the Black Series figures that I buy and how I've been collecting Black Series in general. But moving forward, I'm afraid that's going to have to change at least somewhat. I'm going to have to start getting a lot more strict on what I buy because it's simply just getting too expensive. As you guys are probably aware, the prices have really crept up recently to where the standard figures are now $24.99 US on average, and the deluxe figures can be, you know, anywhere from like $31.99 to even $39.99 US, and it's just getting so expensive. And for me, it's a combination of the rising prices and then just the space I have in my collection room. Now, some of you may be also tapering down your Black Series collection because of your adversity to the new plastic-free packaging. Now, for me, I could say that is not the case. When it comes to the standard packaging that they've gone windowless, I'm still going to buy the figures I want to buy or really want to buy, regardless of the window or not, since I've become an opener for those packages. And then since Hasbro has announced that the carded figures will keep their bubbles for the Black Series, I was ecstatic about that because that was the main thing I was concerned about for the Black Series, was those carded and special packaging figures like that. So that's great news. And again, so that does not affect me from that regard either. So what's going to be my strategy for collecting Black Series moving forward? Well, for one thing, most figures that are like especially deluxe figures, I'm just not going to buy unless they go down on discount. For example, the Saw Gerrera, very good figure, but again, it's not a droid or a trooper, so it's not on my high priority list, and I just couldn't stomach paying the $34 US for that figure. And so I held off on buying him and had some patience, and eventually I was able to find him for 50% off at Target. That was a steal for that quality of figure, so no brainer to pick him up at that price. And that's just what I'm gonna have to do moving forward for figures that I don't absolutely have to have right away. I'm just gonna wait and see if they go on discount, and if they never go on discount, so be it. Don't need the figure that bad anyways. Now I'm still gonna pick up figures that are of my favorite characters, like this Cad Bane. Cad Bane is one of my favorite characters, so anytime he comes out, I'm gonna have to grab him. Revan is another example of one of my favorite characters, so anytime they come out with these guys, I'm gonna be grabbing them as soon as they come out. I'm not gonna be waiting for discounts. And then stuff like this awesome General Grievous on a Tartakovsky style packaging, retro packaging. I'm gonna grab those, of course, no matter what the price is at retail. And then, here's the credit collection. I've talked about this before. I love the first wave of credit collection. Didn't like the second. Liked a few of the newest wave. And so I'm gonna continue picking up stuff like that if I really like it. And I have started to get into these comic book series or publishers series figures. I've got, I think, 4 or 5 at this point. Here's a picture of 3 of them I have. These are pretty awesome. The packaging is really cool, and a lot of these figures are pretty neat as well. And I had to just pre-order some of these, like the Mara Jade, the Scar Trooper Mike. These are awesome looking. Dr. Afro, I'm a big Afro fan, so I had to order her. But now what they're doing with these publishing series is when you open up the flap, instead of having an open box to the figure like we had with the Boba Fett in Disguise, they've actually put that closed box cover with the photo image of the figure on it. And I just thought this was really strange why they didn't just continue the Boba Fett in Disguise style, because they could still have it without the plastic. Especially because the box has an outer cover flap. So I thought that was really weird, and now I'm going to have to take the figures out of the box, which is fine. I might have done that anyways. And maybe it doesn't even matter, since it's very hard to display these style boxes like on a shelf with the flaps open to show the figure. So I guess all in all, it doesn't really matter. I just thought it was a really weird choice. So overall, my strategy moving forward for collecting Black Series is not going to be a whole lot different than before. It's just going to be a whole lot choosier, and I'm going to be waiting on those discounts for figures whenever I can or have the willpower to do so. And basically, it just means my collecting rate is going to slow down pretty significantly. So that's going to do it for this episode of Brett on Fett. If you are a Black Series collector, let me know in the comments what type of collector you have been, and whether or not things such as the recent price hikes or plastic-free packaging are affecting how you collect Black Series. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you so much to my subscribers. Don't forget you can also follow me on Instagram and on Twitter. Take care, and we'll see you next time.